Remember on that one, basically what they were doing with this gerrymandering thing, it was becoming racial gerrymandering. What's the difference between racial and just regular gerrymandering?
Well, racial is, I mean, it's separating on race, and I thought just gerrymandering is just, you know, for Republican or you know, districts.
Yeah, it would be political party for gerrymandering. Racial gerrymandering would be based on race. And in the Alabama one, they drew that district that excluded, like, I don't know, it was only 96, 97% white. It basically excluded all the black voters. In North Carolina, do you remember the district that I drew that kind of looked like a banana? Yeah, the banana district, right? Okay, if you remember on that one, they created, what was the different about that North Carolina banana district? They were concerned, southern states were, that they were not getting enough minorities into the United States Congress, so they created a minority-majority district. And a majority-minority district, I'm gonna get this right. So the idea was that they were creating a district that was going to be a majority black district with the logic that a majority black district would elect a black official. They struck both of these down, the Supreme Court did, and they said in both of these, any time a district is based primarily on race, it is immediately constitutionally suspect. So it doesn't matter if it is benefiting a race like North Carolina or excluding a race like it was in that Alabama district, both of them were illegal. What other questions do y'all have?
Also about gerrymandering.
Yes?
What about gerrymandering and 14th Amendment?
Don't worry about that. Yeah, don't worry about that. What else have you got?
Franking.
Franking. What was franking? This was one of the examples of reasons why incumbents typically win so high. Go ahead, Pavel.
It was the ability to send newsletters for free.
Yeah, free mailings, free postage, free printing that you can send back to your district. What's the key? What can it not say?
Vote for me.
It can't say vote for me. So they can include all kinds of wonderful pictures. They can have things in there. You're kissing babies, shaking hands. They can tell you what you passed. The information that they show could convince somebody to vote for you, but they can't say vote for me on it. That's actually not allowed. And if you remember, if the challenger is going to be sending information out to the district, who pays for the challengers? The challenger pays for it, him or herself. Exactly. What were some of the other factors with why incumbents win so much? And if you remember on that thing, 94, 98, 96, 98, 98.
Name recognition.
What is name recognition, Pavel?
Because the name always, like, on the media, they say something, they say something low, so like they try. So like they're always on the media. People see them. People hear the names.
The longer that you're there, the more people hear your name. The more people hear your name, the more that they're going to associate it with you during election time. And I think I had mentioned to you the idea that when these elected officials get on good committees, they're able to go and take pictures in the districts with those oversized checks. That's what we're talking about here, getting their name out there, these different kinds of ceremonies. Pavel, if you're a challenger and for whatever reason Maya has been in Congress for 10 years, well, that probably means that she's going to beat you, not because you're not as good of a candidate, but just because she's got 10 years of her name out there and you have 10 minutes. What are the other things? So franking was one, name recognition was one. What else?
Money.
Money. Tell me about money.
It costs a lot of money to run a campaign.
Costs a lot of money to run a campaign.
So you cannot work the full time because you need to campaign and it takes all of your time. Also, it costs, I think it was like up to $1 million for a seat in the House.
In the House.
On average, and up to like $2 million for a seat in the Senate.
It's even higher than that for the Senate side. Let's deal with this money really quick. So what is it that a House member gets paid?
If they win, all the expenses are covered.
Well, what did we say? What's that?
200.
Yeah, it's a little bit more than 200,000, especially if you're the speaker. And to your first point, what did you say? You said the challenger more than likely is going to have to quit a job. They're going to have to commit. Number one, a lot of people can't quit their jobs. Number two, if I'm the incumbent, I'm making $200,000 a year. Well, guess what? That means that I'm going to be campaigning and getting paid at the same time. Talking about money before. Go ahead, Roslyn.
It's like when we watched that movie with
Eddie Murphy. Yes, Eddie Murphy. Eddie Murphy, why did he win?
Name recognition.
Name recognition. He won because he cut off the Thomas, shortened the Jefferson, became Jeff Johnson like the dead guy did. Okay, so pay is part of it. Staff. What was the trick with staff? You get basically about $1 million for staff. Who pays for the Challenger staff? The Challenger does. So ultimately this means that, first of all, when you campaign as the incumbent, you're getting paid. Second of all, your staff is paid for. Third of all, what about the interest groups? What about the political action committees? What about money with them?
So like most, they would like invest money in the person who is more like to win.
Yeah, they are. They're going to give more money to the incumbent. So if you're the challenger, you might get some money, but you're not going to get as much as the incumbent would. And even that little bit of money that you get from them is not going to cover your expenses. So money is a big piece to this. Name recognition is a big piece to this. Franking is a big piece to this. Does anybody remember what the other one was? Well, how does experience relate to this, Nadia?
You get more connected the longer you stay in power.
Yeah.
The longer you're there, the longer you show loyalty, the more you get recognized.
The more you get recognized. How do they recognize you? The longer that you stay there. They give you something that's better than when you first got there. What happened to Eddie Murphy when he was trying to get into a committee?
He basically, like was talking like how they talk about acting, how the community was acting.
Yeah.
Like when he went to the Chinese community, he's like.
Well, now he's just trying to get elected there. He's just trying to get elected there. But what was the trick with his committee? He wanted to get on a specific committee, right? He wanted to get the honeypot. He wanted to get on power and industry. And go ahead.
Race as like the racial card to get into.
He used the racial card to get in. If you remember, though, the guy told him if you wait 10 or 12 years, 5 or 6 terms, your name will move along the list and eventually you'll get there. The trick with experience is that basically all of the new members get stuck with the crap assignments. They get stuck with the crap assignments. With that said, the longer that they stay there and demonstrate their loyalty and their responsiveness and they do what they're told, then in fact they get better assignments. And that's the trick with this. The longer that you're there, the more that you get along, or the more that you go along, the more that you get along, they will eventually look you up. Or hook you up, I should say. What other questions have you got on this? Terms. Bill of attainder and ex post facto law are pretty much straightforward definitions, so that shouldn't be too crazy. I think we've covered everything else. All of you have the video in there, how a bill becomes a law. Let me go ahead and stress on this. I'm not going to test you on the whole thing, but pay attention to what happens in the committees. Pay attention to the committees part on there, and maybe pay attention to what the president can do when the president gets a bill. And depending upon what we go over in class tomorrow, I might address that just a little bit more, just a little bit more. But go ahead. Rosalind's got to go to work, so she's leaving. Articles. Do you have any questions about any of the articles from this one? And basically, y'all all have the same articles with the exception of the 11 o'clock. You're not going to get the rape kit article, but 9 and 10 o'clock you will. What questions do y'all have about the articles for this chapter? The California spanking law, how old could the kid be, or how old could the kid not be? Go ahead.
4.
4. So basically, if the child was under 4, you could not spank them. You could spank them once they turned 4. What was the penalty if you got caught under this proposed law in California? If you spanked a child that was under 4?
1 year in jail?
8 months.
Up to a year in jail. And what was it called? Felony? No, misdemeanor. This was a misdemeanor that could land you with up to a year in jail. Now understand, I'm not saying that if you got busted spanking your 3-year-old that you were automatically going to do a year in jail. This would be the kind of thing that would probably graduate up to a year in jail. But the idea is that they wanted to prevent child abuse, I'm guessing. Do you remember who the woman was that actually introduced the bill? She didn't have kids. Her nickname was the old spinster. I believe it was Nancy Lieber. Does that sound right, Aaliyah?
Yeah.
Nancy Lieber was the one that introduced it. What did Schwarzenegger say?
He said that he was for it, but they couldn't enforce it.
He said that he was spanked as a child in Austria. He said that he was probably in favor of something like this, but he also said that he did not see how, in fact, they could enforce this. And if you remember, the biggest problem that we had in class was trying to exactly define what a spanking was. If you remember, we had a difficult time with that. What was the X Factor article?
That was the X
It was not the ex post facto one. It was about the ex-wives. Anybody remember the ex-wives?
The male politicians.
Yeah, what about the male politicians and the ex-wives, Nadia?
This is about Jerry Ryan.
Who was Jerry Ryan? How could you forget
How
that?
could I forget
He
that?
was a Republican Senate candidate.
Jerry Ryan was?
No, she was the ex-wife.
Jerry was the
No,
ex-Ryan.
Jack Ryan, I'm sorry.
Jack Ryan was the guy who was actually running for the office. And what was he running? What office, what state?
Illinois?
Illinois. What party was he?
He was Republican.
Jack Ryan was a Republican running for the United States Senate in Illinois. And what was the startling revelation? He was actually getting ready to win this election. What was the startling revelation that Jerry Ryan offered? Or actually, no, she didn't offer this. How did this, what happened? Let's just put it that way.
She issued, you're talking about the wife, right?
Well, there was a secret that was released, right?
Well, the secret was he repeatedly asked her to go to sex clubs to have sex and to have sex in public.
He repeatedly asked her to go to sex clubs and to have sex in public. Who released this information? It wasn't her, was it?
No.
It was the Democrats. The Democrats were getting ready to lose this election, and really about the last month, at that point, the Democrats released this. Now, with all of this said, what did she say? What else did she say in addition to the sex clubs and the sex in public?
She said that when she cried, telling her when she cried that tears were a turn off.
When she cried, he told her tears were a turnoff. Ultimately, she would in fact say that she supported him and she thought that he was a great father and he would make an excellent senator. Did he win?
No.
Who won?
Obama.
Obama won. And kind of the interesting piece about this, you don't hear this story, Obama benefited, frankly, from a sex scandal. And had this not broken, the fact remains, I think, that Jack Ryan may have been elected senator, and we may have never heard of Barack. I'm not saying Barack went through the records, I'm just saying his people went through the records. And as I recall from all three classes, a majority of y'all said that you would go through the records too in order to make sure that you won. Out of wedlock laws. What were the out of wedlock laws? Do y'all remember Deborah Hobbs?
The sheriff?
The sheriff dispatcher. What happened to Deborah Hobbs?
She was 5.
In what state?
Was it North Carolina?
North Carolina.
Just default.
What default? Yeah, just say North Carolina. It's got to be right, right? It's either that or Russia in your class. But so anyway, here's the question on this. Deborah Hobbs was fired. What law did she violate?
She was she was living with a person. They were unmarried.
Yeah, she was living with a man out of wedlock. The sheriff went to her prior to an election and said, listen, we've got a law in North Carolina that makes it a crime to live together out of wedlock. So if in fact you continue to do this, you're breaking the law. You either need to marry him, you need to move out, or you're going to need to get a new job. Did she marry him? Did she move out?
No.
She was fired. And what happened?
She went to.
She sued and
And she won.
she won. Why?
Because I don't remember.
Wasn't it because of it was an outdated law?
This was an outdated law. This seemed like this was an overlap too much between church and state. This was something that wasn't even enforced. I think I told you I lived with somebody out of wedlock and didn't even know it was against the law when I did it. These kinds of things. The other piece to this, some people said that this was a religion or a morality-based law. And although a number of you said that you would live with somebody out of wedlock, a number of you in fact said that you wouldn't. The morality people, the people that are supposed to be very religious in the article, had actually given another reason why this law should remain in effect. Do you remember what it was?
Abuse.
Abuse. They said that you were 3 times more likely to report domestic violence if you were living together out of wedlock than if in fact you were actually married. And the way that they worded it was the key on this. If they're not saying that domestic violence was 3 times less, they said it would be 3 times less likely to be reported, which is actually a very different way of saying it.
If you're married.
Yeah, if you're married, that's right. So understand, the trick on that isn't that in fact it was less, but it was reported less. A couple of other things on here.